Good morning. On behalf of our Beyond Recruitment team and myself, Liza Viz, a warm welcome on joining us this morning's webinar on empathetic leadership, from the soft and fluffy to the tangible and real, with our valued partner, Dr. Harold Hillman. Harold is online with us today, excitingly from New York City. Kia ora, Harold.
Kia ora.
Introduction. Kia ora. Very exciting to be zooming in. By way of introduction, albeit that Harold is well known to many of you, Dr. Harold Hillman is a leadership expert and executive coach. Harold has coached many C-suite leaders across the globe for over 20 years. In New Zealand, Harold has worked with organisations such as Fonterra, Air New Zealand, Genesis, Energy, Vector, Auckland Council, Wellington Council, Heineken, Southern Cross Healthcare, and BNZ, to name but a few. The list is extensive. Harold has also authored 2 best-selling books, The Imposter Syndrome and also Fitting In, Standing Out. Most recently, Harold has released his latest book, Empathy. This is the book. I'm sure you can see it. Unfortunately, the launch of Harold's latest book was delayed due to the Auckland Omicron outbreak in August last year, and the lockdown ensured that Harold wasn't able to progress with the launch. But I've just heard from Harold that we're going to relaunch his book, and that'll be in August this year again, so fingers crossed. In this morning's webinar, Harold will be sharing his knowledge and parts of his book and how the global pandemic has brought empathy alive for leaders. Harold will talk to his insights as to what the realities have meant for leaders and what lessons have actually been learned through the pandemic. Harold will also talk to inclusion through COVID, with particular reference to the realities around the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated, both in business and in social settings. In our complex and ever-growing global village and the international business landscape in constant change, disarray and pressure, leadership, diversity and inclusion sit very high on the agenda for many boards, many CEOs and many business leaders. Harold this morning will offer us his sage pointers. Before I hand over to Harold, please note that this webinar ends quite sharply at 12 o'clock. Please do feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar on the chat link. These questions will be collated for me to run past Harold in the last 10 minutes or so, and as long as we have not run out of time. We now move to New York City to join Harold. Harold, over to you.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Kia ora.
On the call. It is such a pleasure to join you from the other side of the world, the Northern Hemisphere.
Very exciting, Harold.
Yeah, we're a day behind, but completely in sync. I came over on the 7th. I'm on a 2-week holiday here in the States. I left New Zealand on the 7th, and I'll be returning on the 23rd. And with my youngest daughter with me, who lives in California and is coming over to take a much needed vacation. So I have the great pleasure of being accompanied back to New Zealand with my daughter. It's been a fantastic time here. I started my trip over in LA with my oldest daughter and her husband and my 2 grandsons, who are 10 and 6 years old, and made my way then from LA to Denver. I was in Denver for a couple of days, then Washington, DC, my birth home, my birthplace, and was able to spend some real quality time with my sister, my brothers, and now up to New York. I've got one more leg on this trip, and that is back over to Sacramento and then home. And I am already missing New Zealand. I am already missing Just the it's been wonderful and exciting to be on the road, but I'm eager to get back home. I've been curious about just to compare the sort of living with COVID scenario in New Zealand and in the States, and we're roughly on the same page. Maybe the States had a bit more of an advance surge into that chapter of living with COVID. I use the analogy of the deranged uncle who lives up in the attic, and we know he's there. He's going to be around for a while. And so we try to keep him in his room, taking food up, throwing videos in, and those types of things. But occasionally he will wander in. He's part of the family. That's the sort of the reality in the scenario now, living with COVID in the States, which is it's there, but it no longer is going to be the controlling factor around the quality of lives. There have been surges over the last couple of weeks, and certainly in Washington, D.C. and New York. So you see the same scenario as in New Zealand, with people being extra cautious, especially with masks. But there is this sense that life is moving on, and it's just really cool to be able to be here. I just wanted to make this observation. It's been 2.5 years. It was 2.5 years. I last saw my grandsons in January of 2020. They are 10 years old and 6 right now. The last time I saw them, they were 8 and 4. And, the screen scenario worked just fine in the beginning, but ultimately sitting with them, hugging them, holding their hands, kissing them, snuggling with them. There's nothing more precious on earth than the warmth that we give each other. And as we all evolve to a different way of working and living, but certainly in the work context, as we realize that a lot more work will be done virtually, and rightfully so, because there's just in terms of efficiency, productivity, all the pluses associated with it. But whether it be traveling halfway around the world to hug your grandchild, or whether it be just walking up to someone in the office, shaking their hands, and someone that you perhaps have never met before in person, there is no substitute to the connecting factor of warmth. As mammals, as social mammals, we require warmth. It's something that we give to each other essentially by being together. So that really was reinforced for me on this trip here. I want to talk today with you all about the topic of empathy, one that is near and dear to my heart. Over the last 4 years or so, as Liza mentioned, the book it actually launched last year. So even though we didn't have a party and a formal launch, the book actually hit the shelves last year, and it has been a huge focal point of my work over the last 12 months or so. For those of you on the screen or on the call who lead a team, if you're a leader, if other people report to you, it really is important to be, it's really, really critical to be across this construct of leadership shadow. I had the great fortune of being a military officer and a corporate executive in my career. And in the military, you are much more purposeful about your shadow. And the fact that people pay a lot of attention to you when you're a leader. They are looking at everything. They are making inferences about what you value, what's important to you, based on not only what you say, but what you do. And as is always the case, what you do is more powerful than what you say. For leaders, particularly those who grow more senior in rank, the two biggest derailers of senior leaders in organizations is perceived hypocrisy or duplicity, and the idea that there is an incongruence between what you tell people is important and then the experience that they actually have with you. And so I really, around all the work that I do with senior executives and executive teams and boards, trying to get teams, individuals and teams to fully appreciate that you're always on 24/7, that ethic, sort of that military officer ethic, that you're never off duty, whether you be in the commissary or at a movie theater or wherever it may be, that your shadow is something that you really want to be mindful of. And so it's within that context that we launch into this discussion, this conversation today then on the topic of empathy. I'm a big advocate of what's called the trust triangle. The trust triangle was introduced in a TED Talk by Professor Frances Frey, who was a full business school professor at Harvard University, and Uber invited her in back in 2017 to really push into their toxic culture there. And her focal point was in helping Uber build leadership capability, something that they had not been proactive or purposeful about. And she came out of that experience and talked about the fact that if you, as a leader, as a person, but certainly as a leader, if you want people to connect with you, not because they have to, meaning you're the boss. And so if our boss is not asking us to do anything unethical or illegal, we are most likely to follow their lead around it, even if we don't necessarily agree. That's called compliance, some complying with authority. And you already have that by virtue of your rank as a leader. But you want people to be connected to you in a deeper sense, a much deeper sense, more than just complying. It's more like a commitment. Not that I have to do this, but I really want to do this. And there are three things that Frances Frey pointed out in this TED Talk that are essential around human connection. And this is the focal point in my work with individuals and teams. That first point is authenticity. Authenticity, and that is your ability to give people a genuine experience. And there's a strong correlation between giving people a genuine experience and a consistent experience. And so again, the idea that day to day, week to week, month to month, you are consistent in the persona that you project with people, and they have a sense that you are transparent, that you're genuine with them, that you're not playing games, that you're not being political, that it is what it is, and it enables other people then to open up with you. There's a strong, again, correlation between me being genuine with you, and if we're all in the same frame of mindset, meaning we want the best outcomes, it opens up the energy when you give people your genuine self. The second component is logic, and that is, in addition to being genuine, it does help if you have your narrative now. And a narrative is basically the words that take people along with you. Sometimes we are very genuine and authentic, but we don't necessarily have our narrative down. Our narrative is what gets people on the same page with us. There's a rational component to the narrative, but there's also an emotive connection to that narrative. And sometimes leaders have to work on their narrative. They're giving people a genuine experience, but their narrative is not compelling enough. It needs to be more viscerally connected to others. And then there's the third component, which is empathy. And empathy is it became real for us over the last 2.5 years. I'll talk a bit more around that. Now, you may look at these three components here, authenticity, logic, and empathy, and if you are a philosophy fan or someone who studies philosophy, you may say, hey, these look very similar to Dr. Aristotle's 3 proofs of rhetorical persuasion, and they are. Authenticity, Aristotle referred to that as ethos, and that being character. Aristotle, you might say that Aristotle was an executive coach, if we put it in today's modern popular vernacular, Aristotle was an executive coach, and he worked with leaders, and he said to them, hey, if you want people to follow you because they believe in you, nail these three things. His word for authenticity was ethos, which translates into character. And that is character, what defines you, the values, the principles, your lines in the sand. Those are the things that people really gravitate towards. People really gravitate towards leaders who emanate strong character. Aristotle's word for empathy was pathos. Pathos, and pathos was that notion of emotive connection. Emotive connection. Aristotle believed that even back 24 centuries ago, that human beings are wired to feel with and for each other. And why not leverage that in the sense of empathy, a stronger sense of connection? And then his word for logic was logos. Now, around the theme of authenticity, I have, as Liza mentioned, authored two books in that realm. In 2013, The Imposter Syndrome, and then in 2015, Fitting and Standing Out. And really, my work on this point on the trust triangle around authenticity was to just really reinforce the point that there is a human need to fit in. But sometimes if the social order is too stringent or does not value inclusion, there's this notion of fitting in so well that you turn off your own voice and perspective. So you're fitting in, you get a lot of credits for being quiet, but you're not really making a difference in the way that you had hoped for. And so as leaders in an organization, a big part of your work is creating an inclusive environment where people feel that their voice is not only expected, but appreciated. And then this year, in 2020, in August of 2020, the book, Empathy, The Human Side of Leadership, I launched that book. Now, believe it or not, I was worried in 2020 whether or not I would be able to make this construct called empathy tangible and real for people. I grew up in the realm, back in the management paradigm. I'm 66 years old, and so I've seen an incredible shift from what we call the management paradigm in business, which focus more on managing performance, managing others, and the shift now being, of course, towards leading. So from managing to leading others. And with leading others, emotional intelligence is required now more than ever. And I don't need to make that case too hard, given the last 2.5 years that we've been through. And empathy sits at the core of that. And it certainly has become real for all of us. It was Aristotle who suggested that Aristotle would say to his people, if you want to grow character, if you want to grow your ethos, if you want to really come across as a person who emanates strong character, you go out and find adversity. Go out and seek it, he would say, particularly in terms of the hierarchy that he was used to dealing with, where adversity rarely showed up on their doorsteps. And the idea was, go out and seek of it, because you can't grow wiser unless you face into obstacles, which put you in a position of then defining what's important, what's really important. What are your lines in the sand? What are your stakes in the ground? And those types of things. And I tell you, over the last 2.5 years, adversity found us. We didn't have to go find it. It was named COVID. It was an insidious, invisible enemy in the early days. None of us had a playbook. We were all on the same learning curve. It was the first time, certainly in my lifetime, where every single person on planet Earth had to deal with the same scenario, which is we're making this up as we go along. Vulnerability was heightened, anxiety was heightened. We were all on a learning curve. When on a learning curve, some of the things that we take away from this experience, when on a learning curve, it does help very often if that because that vulnerability can be very connecting, as was the case as we were navigating our way through this scenario. Compared to 2.5 years ago, we all seem like experts now. But the reality is that this scenario has taken us deep. It has taken us inward. It has taken us downward in terms of really examining what's important, purpose in life. Many people re-examining that. I certainly have. You all have as well. And the idea is that on the other side of this, we're getting there. On the other side of this, hopefully the experiences will roll up into insights and perspective. And one of the things that I would like for you all to really think about is human connection and the idea that empathy truly became real for us over the last 2.5 years. Empathy is the ability to walk in another person's shoes. So not if you haven't necessarily walked in those shoes, at least being able to understand what it must be like. And every single one of us on the screen had to not only extend empathy, but receive empathy as we made our way through the scenario there. Emotional intelligence became real. It was back in 1995 where the author Daniel Goleman was an author who had studied emotional intelligence. The construct of EQ, emotional intelligence, had been around since the 1960s or so. But he was the first person to pull it all together into a book. And that book was called EQ. And the premise in the book was that he predicted that in 2 decades, which is now 2 decades, that EQ, emotional intelligence, would be more important than IQ in success, not only in business, but in life. That was his premise. That was the big bet around this thing called EQ in the 1990s when the management paradigm was still in place. And that is EQ, empathy, diversity, anything that was soft and fuzzy, felt soft and fuzzy, was put over here in a basket. And the idea being that we're more focused on processes and systems and protocols and what we call the hardware of running a business and nailing a business down and ensuring a business's success, as opposed to the software, which was the idea that in addition to having strong IQ, which was prominent in the management paradigm, one would need reasonably strong EQ. Now, back then, I was teaching I was the director of Amoco. Amoco Corporation was a petrochemical company, an oil company in the States, one of the larger ones, prior to being acquired by BP in 1999. And back then, I remember introducing to a room full of approximately 100 managers, most of them very experienced, most of them engineers, so the rational part of the brain being very prevalent. And they just laughed and laughed and laughed. They just thought it was a hilarious proposition that they, as leaders, would have to get their heads around this idea of not only being smart about the what, IQ, but also being smart about the how, EQ. And that really, I attribute the launch of EQ and really in the business world to Jack Welch and the work he did at GE to really emphasize the importance, moving into the new century back then, that really emphasized the importance of not only getting the what right, but the how right. pre-EQ, it was all focused on the what, and the what was important to deliver no matter how. And that is, again, Uber story. If you all are, if you want to see how the difference that how makes, take a look at the Uber story, and you'll get some real insights from that. So EQ was the big bet back then, and empathy was at the core. There are 4 components to emotional intelligence. One of those is self-awareness, and that is, look, by the time you reach 40, for those of you who are on the call who are 40 or over, you should have a reasonable, even if you don't necessarily acknowledge it to other people, you should have a reasonable sense of what's, when you're at your best and when you're not. Those things that bring out the best in you and those things that bring out the worst in you. And what you want to do around self-awareness in terms of emotional intelligence is maximize your time in that optimal zone, minimize your time in that negative zone. All of us have to go into a negative zone every now and then, but if the majority of your day and your week is in that negative zone, in scenarios that actually where you don't thrive, where it doesn't bring out the best of you, it can be particularly draining, and that's not good for you. And as a leader, it's certainly not good in terms of your leadership shadow. So know thyself is a starting premise around self-awareness, and that is, do I get enough feedback from other people to have a reasonable sense of how they see me? It's really important around that. And then there's self-management, and that is, if you've got self-awareness intact, then self-management is, then I make adjustments. in terms of what I can do to bring out the best of me. Maybe I need to start exercising more. Maybe I've been fitting in exercise as opposed to building it in. And when I do that, I know that it runs me ragged. And even though I've got a lot on, there's a mental model in terms of self-management. Build it into your schedule. Don't fit it in. Build in people who energize you, who make you laugh, who invigorate you. Don't fit them in. These are, in terms of self-management, it's you doing things to keep yourself in that optimal zone. Sometimes you just need to let go and let other people take stuff. We want to get things across the line, and if there's a tendency to be a bit of a perfectionist, we hold on to stuff and we get into stuff that really is gnarly and draining, and it's better to just delegate and get out of that space and stay in that space, which is naturally invigorating. Then there's social awareness, and in addition to self-awareness and self-management, there's the idea that you really do need to be mindful of as leaders in terms of influence. You have to be able to adjust and adapt your stance, your position, how you walk into a room, all of those things that make a big difference in terms of people being willing to follow you. And then managing relationships, and all of those things are important. There's nothing on there that surprises any of you on the screen, but that's the essence of emotional intelligence, with empathy being right there at the core. Now, there's a reason why empathy is at that core. And the reason is that we as mammals, we are hardwired. We are hardwired to feel for another person, to feel with and for another person. There been extensive studies on mammals, particularly gorillas, chimpanzees, rats, you name it, dogs, cats. The idea that as early as, certainly in an infant, a human infant, as early as 3 weeks old, is able to detect where its caregiver may be anxious or upset. It's the same as with your pet at home, a dog or a cat that comes to cuddle with you or snuggle up next to you because it sort of senses that something may be wrong. It's an intuitive thing. Empathy is wired in the limbic brain, what we sometimes call the mammalian brain. And the idea that that's largely experienced as an intuition that's telling you that it may not necessarily line up with logic, but this idea that another person may be hurting, and your decision to turn back around in the hallway and walk towards their office and knock on the door and ask if you could have a 3-minute conversation just to check in and see how they are dealing with it. We have in our brain these neural pathways, and they're these wonderful neurons. They're called mirror neurons. And mirror neurons give us the ability, when we're listening to someone tell a story, let's say a distressing story, or when we see another person in pain, wincing in pain, we begin to feel that ourselves. The same activity in their neural pathways, the person experiencing it mirrors what we are experiencing. So the idea that we don't actually have to be going through it to be able to put ourselves in another person's shoes. The reason why we tear up at movies and we cry, or the reason as we're listening to a story, it pulls us in. There's we're wired to, it's almost in terms of listening to a story. There's this process called neural entrainment, where literally the brain almost unfolds a theater. As a person is telling you a story, your brain unfolds a theater, and you are simultaneously in the audience listening to that story and in that story. It's an incredible experience, which enables you to then not only understand what the person is going through, but if you've gone through it yourself, experience it deeper. So there's a neurological capacity in human beings to experience empathy. Unlike other mammal colonies, we have a little bit more control over how we exercise that in terms of context. And so while we would experience pain looking at another person going through pain, if we believe that that person deserves that pain, it tends to nullify the empathy just a bit. Other mammals don't have the ability to do that. And so humans can be a bit more selective around it. But the bottom line is we are wired to feel for and with other individuals. When we talk about leading with empathy, there are 3 components to that. 3 components to that. That's head, heart, and hands. Head, heart, and action. What we refer to, head is cognitive empathy, heart is emotional empathy, and hands would be considered compassionate empathy. And I just want to break those down for you all around a scenario that became real for me. My best friend in the world, who lives in New Zealand, did not get vaccinated and chose not to get vaccinated. My dear friend is a brilliant man. He's got 2 master's degrees. He's a wonderful person in terms of his values, would do anything for anyone. He's one of the kindest, most giving people that I know. But he chose, based on a couple of just his own rationale, not to get vaccinated, and he considered it to be an informed choice. I was upset as his best friend. I was upset in the sense of, hey, I don't want you to die. And so he would experience my passion coming at him in a way that felt a bit more harsh than what he necessarily was expecting. Where I was coming from was, I don't want to lose you, dude. But what he was experiencing was judgment. And not only from me, but for the first time in his life, he felt what it was like to be on the outside. That sense of being judged, evaluated, appraised, scrutinized, loathed, judged, vilified. It was a daunting experience for him. And it wasn't until probably December of last year when he and I sat together and he talked about that experience that I realized that I hadn't been doing a lot of listening to him. I've been doing a lot of preaching to him in terms of heavy advocacy, but it really caught my attention. The author of the book Empathy, my best friend, sat me down and said, "Hey, I know you care about me, and that's where your passion is coming from, but wow, it's different feeling judged." What he felt was that we were not making an effort to understand him, and that it was a very important distinction, a very important distinction, a very important one, and one that I see very often in a business context. The more senior we get very often in business, the more we dig in, we advocate. There's a correlation between your age and your rank and how heavy you advocate. And that is, this is the way it is, this is the way it is. It almost correlates with your experience. The reality is that many people come into you to have a conversation where they just want to be understood. It's not necessarily that you have to agree with them. But when you listen to people, do you listen to them to refute? Or do you listen to them to understand? It's a different energy associated with that. Each of us on the call today, within the next 24 hours, is going to be in a conversation where we find ourselves, so kind of a passive thing, but we find ourselves listening to refute. This person is making a case, they're bringing a different perspective, they're bringing a different vantage point, just sort of based on their experience. But sometimes we listen to find fault, we listen to find error, and the person on the other side of that conversation can feel it. You know from your own experience, everyone on this call knows from their own experience, when someone is listening to you and they're judging you, and they're appraising you, and they have written you off, even though they're nodding and even though they are sitting there. And the idea that sometimes the biggest thing that you can do is just make space for another person to be heard and to be understood, even if you vote differently, even if you ultimately disagree. There is something connecting in the idea that you gave me your all in terms of understanding where I was coming from. And around cognitive empathy, whether it be our nation dealing with the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated, or whatever the scenario may be, cognitive empathy requires that in the first instance, I make room for you to unpack your thinking without judgment or appraisal. I am listening to understand. Stephen Covey, seek first to understand before trying to be understood. It is more connecting when you do that. I make mention in the book of the case of Daryl Davis, a Black musician who attended several Ku Klux Klan meetings in the U.S. By invitation of the Grand Wizard of the Klan, who he had met in a club. And it's a fascinating story where this Black guy went to these Klan meetings. And by virtue of him not going there to judge, but just simply to just sort of like, hey, tell me, what do you believe? What's over 100 Klanspeople, 100 Klansmen turned in their robes and their hoods. They quit the Klan as a result of this guy not judging them, but just really just sort of sitting with them. And it's a hard thing to imagine, but when people don't feel judged, they are more likely to hear your perspective as well. So cognitive empathy, very important. Even if you've never walked in those shoes, can you at least understand, make an effort to understand what another person is going through before you whisk them off or write them off, that type of a thing. Emotional empathy. This is, not only can I understand what you're going through, I have been there. And many of us felt this over the last 2.5 years, where we've wondered, where's that fine line between understanding and feeling, knowing what this person is going through because you've gone through the same thing. For all of us, it's the COVID scenario, but maybe it's breast cancer, or maybe it's losing a child, or a significant tragedy in life, or something that where you can actually physically relate to that. It's important with emotional empathy to feel with the person, which is very connecting, but not to wear their pain. It's called emotional contagion when you, the leader, feel that you need to go the extra mile to start doing things or taking care of things for people, which then can be quite disempowering. It actually can have the opposite effect. And so with emotional empathy, it is connecting. Sometimes it makes a huge difference for a person to be sitting across from someone else who has gone through the same thing. It's gone through the same thing. It's just a real sense of connection. All you need to do is just be there around that. Don't feel the need to wear another person's pain. And as a leader, as we've gone through this period of vulnerability, that's something that you need to be mindful of. Keep yourself above the line with emotional empathy. It is connecting just to know that you can feel what they're going through, but don't solve problems for others. And then there's compassionate empathy. And I often make the case that with compassionate empathy doesn't require you to fix anything for anyone. Sometimes you do give. You tell a person, go home, take the rest of the afternoon off. You got a lot going on. Take care of that. We'll see you tomorrow. That's a form of compassionate empathy, where you perhaps have the latitude to be able to say to another person, drop that, just focus on that, those types of things. We do it all the time with folks. But I want to emphasize here that compassionate empathy does not require you to do anything. It just requires you to be there, to be present for 5 minutes. No phone calls, no buzzing phone, no one knocking on the door. Someone who needs to have a conversation with me, perhaps about a mistake that they made, which is a big deal in their head, and maybe 5 minutes with them of you just focused on them and helping them understand, keeping it in perspective. This is a learning opportunity, those types of things. In our busy, distracted world where there are more meetings now because we're working virtually and people are pressed going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, sometimes we aren't present. Sometimes another person, whether it be your partner at home, a kid, or a colleague at work, a member of your team who just needs you to just listen. I just need somebody to talk. Sometimes people just need to talk. That's a human thing. And making that space is often one of the biggest and kindest acts of compassion. Excuse me. Let me keep moving. In the book, I write about, I call it the Empathy Toolkit, and that is, okay, with these 3 forms, I write about 9 case stories. The 3 case stories to illuminate cognitive empathy, 3 to illuminate emotional empathy, and 3 around compassionate empathy. And then I introduce what's called the toolkit. And this is just, again, the idea of what can I do starting today that will make a difference? And one of those is active listening. With active listening, I highlight 6 different ways that you can listen to someone. But you could be a passive listener, which is I'm nodding, but I'm not really listening. I'm actually listening for fault or holes in your logic. I'm looking where I'm waiting for you to breathe so that I can get in there and find fault. That's sometimes how we listen. Active listening is different, and that is you actually asking the person who has requested some time with you, how would you like me to listen in this conversation? I can listen as a valve, which means I am going to be largely quiet, and sometimes another person just needs to vent. They just need to vent. And we're there just as a person there. You know what that's like. Sometimes you just need to vet. Your intuition will often just tell you that that's the case. Do you need me to listen to reflect? Which is, I can listen to the thinking that, I can listen to your thinking, I can listen to your reasoning, and I can play that back to you in terms of what I'm hearing, and then we can calibrate around it. So it may be helpful sometimes to just say to that person, would you like me to listen to reflect? I'll be a mirror, and I'm just going to basically play back what I'm hearing, and then you tell me whether or not that's on the money. Would you like me to listen for assumptions? Meaning that a lot of the conclusions that we draw are inherently infused with assumptions that are a bit subliminal. So would you like me, as you're as you're laying out your business case for this, would you like for me to listen for assumptions that you may be missing because you're maybe too close to them? Would you like me to listen as the contrarian? And that is, just take the opposite view, sort of like in preparing for a debate. So if you say it's black, I'll say it's white. If you say it's red, I'll say it's blue. I'll come from the opposite perspective there if you think that that would be helpful in sharpening up your point of view. Would you like me to listen for balance? And that is, if you tend to be a little bit more analytical, I can lift it up to the conceptual. Or if you're too conceptual, I can bring it down into what would be the more granular components. Would you like me to listen in terms of the balance there? And would you like me to listen for the system, which is what are the ramifications of this decision on the impact on others across the broader business, the organization? I, as you are talking, can listen for the system there. So that's one way to show empathy, is to be active and get the person calibrate with the person. I also talk about the 3 circles, and these 3 circles are circles of influence. And that is 3 circles of energy, where in one of these 3 circles at any point in time, I attribute these 3 circles to Patsy Rodenberg, a renowned acting director, back in 2009, who wrote a book called The Second Circle, where she highlighted the significance of you as a leader trying to keep yourself in second circle. The idea being that that is where empathy connects. In first circle, you're largely inward. That's when you're in your head. You're there at the meeting, but you're not there at the meeting. Someone's talking with you. You're there. You're nodding, but you're at the previous meeting you just came from, or you're at the next meeting you're about to go to. You ever been in a room with someone else and they are there, but they're not there? They're in first circle. They're not giving you anything, and it's a disconnect. Third circle is another zone of disconnect, and that is whereas in first circle you're like a turtle in a shell, in your shell. You're not giving anything. In third circle, you're not taking anything. You're giving a lot. Think of first circle as inhaling. Think of third circle as exhaling. And then third circle is all exhale. You are advocating heavy. You're not listening. You are throwing everything you can at someone else in a conversation or in a decision-making scenario there, and there's a disconnect. It's hard to connect with people in first and third circle. It's second circle where there's a give and take. So it's like an inhale and an exhale, an inhale and an exhale. There's a sense of give and take. And even if you are the senior most leader in the room, you don't lose your mana when you come into second circle. You wear your mana well. And that is that you are still the leader, you're still the decision maker, but you've invited people there to help you shape something. And the idea being that if you really want people to sense that they are being heard and understood, just a sense of inhale, exhale. What are we shaping together? Do you as a leader spend enough time in second circle? Around that self-awareness component of EQ, second circle is very important. Can you maximize your time in that circle there? I'm a big fan of Dr. Maslow from my days as a psychologist. And Dr. Maslow made the case back in the 1940s that You've got to be able to make it through there's 5 things that motivate human beings. You can get real complicated and complex with a lot of theories, but ultimately, if you want people to thrive, you've got to ensure that those first 2 needs are met in terms of physiological and safety needs. So people at work who feel bullied, berated, unsafe, there are work environments like that. There are work environments where people keep their head down low, making it from Monday to Friday, and really low. And that is, and then on Friday, go home, breathe a sigh of relief, and then work yourself back up to go back in. There's some people who work in environments like that. If you really want to help people thrive, they need a sense of belonging. And that is, this is why we really need you here. This is the difference that you're making. You don't need a budget to enable people to thrive at work. Sometimes it's just a matter of, in terms of people who give a lot, work a lot, sometimes all they hear about are mistakes and what they did wrong. We don't fuel them in terms of affirmation. Here's why we need you here. Around esteem. Here's how you make a difference. Here's what you do exceptionally well and why that is so significant to our success, as opposed to mistake, 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 mistake. The idea of affirmation, and then self-actualization, which is about purpose. And so I, in the book, talk about the idea that as a leader, you want to help people in those upper 3 realms. If you want people engaged, absolutely. And then I'm going to end here on that the notion of storytelling. I talked earlier about how the limbic brain is actually wired, this process called neural entrainment. There's no better way to connect with another person or a group of people than with a story. If you're, in terms of the typical story, in terms of what we call the 4-story archetypes, and the idea that there's a belief that as human beings, our human psyche is wired around these 4 archetypes, and that if you are trying to infuse a visceral energy in people, it's important often to take them through a story where someone was experiencing despair, so they were on the other side of victory, that is, and had to really have a personal reckoning. This is what's called the character arc, which results in changes and the idea of hope. An aspiration for people as well. I'm going to end it there, Liza, because I know we're going to end shortly.
Thank you, Harold, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. Just a few questions that we've had come through now. They are coming in now, Harold, and so I'll try and get through. The first one was, if I have a colleague who generally lacks empathy, what's the safest way to have a conversation with them about this?
The safest way to have a conversation with them is to make it clear to them what you require, whether they be your boss or whether they be a peer or whatever the case may be. There are some general things that make it easier for you to be in your zone. And so for someone who lacks empathy or who is berating or let's just say a bit cutting or cold and those types of things, feedback is a gift. And you shape another person's behavior one conversation at a time. And even if you're a direct report, there is nothing at all wrong with saying to your boss, here's some things that really make a difference in terms of my own engagement and energy. I know you have to point out things that go wrong, but I need a little bit more. I need to know where I'm making a difference.
Thank you, Harold. Some people have asked if you could please reshare some of the slides. What I am pleased to say is that we will share Harold's slide stack with you once we send the webinar, the recording of the webinar. So that's Kerry, you asked that question. Adrian, is there a danger with the globe under so much lingering duress that the paradigm shift takes managers and leaders and indeed businesses to a much deeper, broader commitment to EQ empathy, such that the commercial demands and expectations are compromised. How do we make sure that there is equity balance? That's an interesting one, Harold, for many leaders. Yeah.
It is. It is. Do not interpret empathy as soft and therefore antithetical to performance. So the idea being, again, the what and the how. And the what is important. Ultimately, you have to deliver. We can work in a kumbaya environment, but if we're not delivering, ultimately, we're going to fail as a business. And so the reality is that even as we are dealing with performance issues and in some cases exiting people, there's a way to do that with empathy and that respect. So do not interpret empathy or a surge of EQ as meaning that we are laxing up on performance. Not at all. It's the what and the how. Both are important.
Yeah. And there's a question here. Namihi Harold, what a privilege to hear your wisdom today. Loving this session. What are your suggestions, please, for aspiring leaders on ways that we can flex and strengthen our empathetic leadership muscles outside of the work context?
Yeah, what I would say is around the construct of the three circles, I would really just say pay attention to how present you are. One of the biggest ways to convey empathy is to just make space and time for people. In the open space environment pre-COVID, we could expect roughly 54 interruptions on a daily basis, which then makes it very difficult to have deep and meaningful conversations with others. And so what I would say is practice being present. Practice being present. Practice blocking distractions. Practice active listening. Practice really in conversation with another person, particularly if you know you're on two sides of the same issue. Make an effort to push yourself a bit out of your comfort zone and make an effort to really understand that person and watch the fundamental shift in the dynamic that occurs. If you make an attempt to understand and that person's in a good space, they generally will as well. So I would just say, play around with a little bit, this a little bit. How present are you? How willing are you to listen and understand another person? And are you compassionate enough in terms of what you might be able to do, leveraging your influence as a leader in the organization?
There's a couple of questions here which go along the theme of whether there's a particular assessment or way to help someone achieve self-awareness and one step further to tap into and keep developing their emotional intelligence.
Yeah, EQ it's a work in progress. The good thing is that compared to IQ in theory you cannot lift. EQ you can, and self-awareness is the cornerstone there. So if you want to be a stronger leader, it really requires you to make the space to be introspective and reflective. What did I learn? What am I doing differently? And in terms of just the growth zones, from pushing yourself out of your comfort zone into that fear zone, into that learning zone, into the growth zone would be such an important thing in terms of your own self-awareness. It makes a huge difference to people who you lead. If they see you making a strident effort to lift your own capability.
Yeah, thank you, Harold. I guess we're starting to run out of time. The last question that I have for you, Harold, what are the three takeaways that we can look forward to when reading your latest book, Empathy?
I think certainly the feedback, the reviews on the book, etc., have reinforced the toolkit component. For the suggestion being that if you are picking up a book on empathy, you at least probably are leaning towards it being a legitimate or valid construct, and the idea being, how do I make it real? And so the toolkit at the end of in the beginning of the book, I define empathy, deconstruct it a bit, and then to unpack the three components: cognitive, emotional, and compassionate. But the real gold is, I believe, in that toolkit, and then the sort of the final half of the book, Liza.
And I've read your book, and I've gone through it a number of times, almost treated it a little bit like a textbook. And there are some real nuggets in your book. And the thing that I've taken away from your book is most certainly the part and the way that you actually build in the fabric of, you know, what empathy is all about and how you can actually develop it and the different tools that one can use. I think for me, I was really pleased to see that you used a number of different Greek words, because for me, as you know, I'm quite passionate about my Greek language. And so pathos in Greek, and as Aristotle used, means empathy. And in the Greek culture, we talk a lot about pathos. And what it actually means is to feel very deeply and to respect that other person's feelings, their experience, their suffering, and their emotion. And I guess that kind of wraps up what empathy is all about, is, you know, to use the usual colloquialism of put yourself in that other person's shoes in that moment. And as you say, it's not about necessarily advocating.
Yes.
So look, Harold, our time together has come to an end. It's been great to listen to you again. Your insights, as always, are so invaluable, and I'm certain many of our participants, and we've had a massive audience today, will be taking away a lot of different things to think about, which will be relevant to themselves, their organizations, their teams, and their social interactions. To our participants, a huge big thank you for joining us today. We value your ongoing support. We will be doing a draw to pick the 10 lucky attendees who will be receiving a copy of Harold's book. Here it is. Oh, it's fading away. The lucky winners will be announced when we send you a copy of the webinar, the recorded webinar, and Harold's slide stack. Please note that Harold is very happy to be contacted directly for any questions or any interest you may have in him working with your organization or yourself as a leader. So from us this morning, we thank you and wish you all the best, and have a fantastic day. And Harold, enjoy the rest of your trip in the United States, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Can't wait to be back.